Hello.
Hello.
Hi there.
Oh, that was the wrong cable. Let me try that again. Bump, bump. Oops. There we go. So I can't even see any of you. Oh,
You
hello.
will.
Hey, Peter. Haven't seen you in a
Hi,
while.
Brian, how are you?
Nice to see you. Happy New Year.
Yes, and Happy New Year to you too. That's better.
Yeah, let's see. Video.
Hey everyone, Happy New Year.
Hi there.
Good. Happy New Year.
Hello. That's very good. People on time. What's going on in the universe?
We're sticking to our New Year's resolutions.
Yeah, that's not to get sucked into Twitter, but to use Mastodon instead.
I have to admit, I do double postings a lot. So how about you guys?
I've given up on Twitter. I haven't been there for about a month now.
Oh, that's really good. I wish I
No,
could.
that's not true. I've been there to monitor something and to post one technical tweet.
Ah, okay.
But that's no, I mean, I'm definitely not participating in anything.
Yeah, that's fair.
Anything that used to waste my time getting. The whole thing reminded me of that XKCD cartoon where the guy is trying to persuade the girl that it's time. They've got an appointment. It's time to go. They've got to get out. And she says, no, wait. Somebody has said something wrong on the internet. That compulsion to go fix stuff and teach people to do things is very hard to resist.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the meme that if you want the answer to something, post the wrong thing on the internet and somebody will immediately correct you.
That's by far the fastest way to get results.
Yeah.
Makes you look like a fool, but then who cares?
Exactly.
The weird side effect is that actually, in a way, the Twitter streams that I've been following have sort of gone, well, have remained, and all the noise has gone away. So to a certain extent, there's been an unintentional good part to it. I tend to just, I'm read only on Twitter really most of the time.
Yeah.
So just going through our document, I put a link to our little Google Doc here.
Yeah.
And okay, it's 3 past. Well, this is good. This is more people than expected, which makes me feel very good. Partly because, hey, welcome to this thing, what we are doing in it. But also, it seems other people care about the topic. So, you know, in the day of disinformation and like we just talked about Twitter, how wonderful is that, huh?
Yeah, why not?
Pretty good. So I think we should probably wait a few more minutes to let people file in. However, why don't we do introductions? I see happily there's a few new faces, a few medium new faces, and a few very old faces. Is everyone okay doing a name? Well, we can read the name, but name, 1 sentence, and where you are. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, and for simplicity, I'm just going to call you out by where you are on my screen. So that means you probably don't know who's coming next. So that's like school, isn't it? I'll start with Carl.
Hello, everyone. I'm Carl Havenstride. I'm in Alexandria, Virginia, and work for the federal government addressing technical requirements for people with disabilities.
And you are also very familiar with Doug Engelbart's work, which puts you firmly in the center of this. Funnily enough, I'm second. So for those of you who haven't met me in person, I am Frode Hegland, originally Norwegian, now in London. And I think that we all agree we need better communication, better thinking environments. And there are many people doing many things, but there aren't that many people focusing on text, hence the future of text. So I'm not saying text over everything else, absolutely not. Text combined with everything else is wonderful. But yeah, one little thing that is really neat and relevant is I'm very, very excited about the coming world of AR and VR. I've started working more and more in the headset because of the different screen spaces. There's two things I wanted to tell you guys. One is I found yesterday that while working in my own software author in VR, of course, the screen door effect is a bit annoying. It's not ideal yet. But the weird thing is when I had a really big display to do the map, like a knowledge graph, it was totally fine. So there seems to be a very different in terms of for perception for when we're reading versus when we're kind of glancing. So that's the first real new affordance I've noticed with this. And secondly, I just saw on Petapixel today, they were talking about Apple's AR VR headset and how they said, of course, they're going to be porting Final Cut in their own applications. That I think is wonderful for us, because to make that exciting in VR, they're going to have to make some really cool APIs available. So the fact that they are also developers, I think is really good news, because the problem with Oculus is they don't know what they're doing. Right. Anyway, Peter Flynn.
Hi.
Oh, good to see you. How's your mother doing, Frode?
I'm doing good. We're going down in a boxy way here. So Peter Flynn is before you, Peter Wasilko. I look forward to an update from you in a second. We're just introducing ourselves briefly.
Okay. Hi, I'm Peter Flynn. I'm a retired IT support person in Cork in Ireland. I was Ireland's first webmaster, and I have a deep interest in the discussion side of things for this meeting, because I have some firm views, but I've also been involved in so many discussion groups, mailing lists, and fora over the last 30 years that it's become a kind of a normal way of working for everything for me. So that's me.
Thank you, Peter. And Mark Anderson.
Hi, I'm Mark Anderson, based in south coast of England. I'm now a visiting fellow at Southampton. Basically a hypertext researcher, and my other area of interest is sort of personal knowledge management. So knowledge exploration apps, mainly at sort of desktop level rather than the enterprise level. And I have been fairly involved in future of text in recent years, notably last year, sort of assisting Frode with some of the editorial work surrounding the journal.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to contextualize Peter Flynn and Mark Anderson a little bit. Mark Anderson was a PhD student when I was, but he managed to graduate on time, which is just cheating. He's also the person who really helped me understand how to do the data sets behind references, reference managers, and things like this. And Peter Flynn, I met over at dinner at the JATS, the JATS conference, which I attended to try to find a solution to metadata. And he was the one who sat me down and basically said, there is an industry that is devoted to making PDFs, which are then stripped of all metadata. There's another industry that is devoted to extracting that metadata. And that was just a huge insight into how horrible it is for my academic work. Kemp Williams.
I am based in Northern Virginia. I work in NLP for a company that used to be called Risoka, that some of you may be familiar with. We are no longer Risoka. We were acquired by i2 Group just a few months ago. So my work is primarily entity extraction for the TextChart plugin for i2's Analyst Notebook.
Wow, welcome to the community. Wonderful. Rafael from South America.
Hey everyone, I'm Rafael. I live in Brazil in a Japanese farm, and I'm quite interested on this topic. It seems like it's the Republic of Letters meets ChatGPT, but with GPT with actual people. So it seems very interesting. I've been following the future of text for quite a while. Last year I didn't participate much because it was a year where a lot of changes came to my life, and now I'm stable in a great place. And I was also not very interested in VR and AR. So hopefully this year will bring more conversations that I want to participate in, and looking forward to the discussions.
I feel I need to highlight to everyone, Rafael, that your background is not virtual. That's actually your incredible office.
This is not a virtual background.
In an office like that, why do you need VR? Fabienne, maybe you can answer that because you are Mr. VR, AR, and more.
Hey everyone, so I'm Fabien, based in Brussels, Belgium. I'm stuck between indeed this VR, AR part, but also this like more traditional writing in all kind of ways. I work mostly at the European Parliament for prototyping role, doing VR and AR and like weird stuff that doesn't work yet, but hopefully sparks interesting ideas.
Yeah, wonderful. And also worth noting that last year for the book and Symposium Future of Text, which had a focus on AR, VR, Fabienne is the only one who actually built something. And that's kind of amazing because we were looking in so many directions and he managed to produce a wonderful new environment. Chris.
I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the US, and have a long-term interest in this topic. It was actually the inspiration of my personal project, Info Central, which I'm about to relaunch. So happy to join in this discussion this year. Sounds like something very much up my alley.
Could you tell us briefly what that project is?
It's sort of in the distributed, decentralized internet space. So I'm rethinking a lot of the background infrastructure for this type of collaboration tools, communication, community building, all that sort of thing.
Fantastic. Welcome. Obviously, I know you from outside here, but it's good to see you here. Jack, so good to see you. Good Californian morning to you.
Well, bonjour from southern left coast of the colonies. I actually met Frode in order of magnitude early 2000 in basically in Doug Engelbart's old dig space, SRI International, and we met again several times at Doug's house and at conferences we attended that were in relation to Doug. Yeah, we go way back. My interest in text has now focused on text-based serious games. I was doing a PhD at the Open University in Milton Keynes when, which really brought me very close to the people who do issue-based information systems, structured conversations, and that class of sense making. And I think we found a way to combine it into a game platform, which, by the way, will be open source.
No.
And you're behind Open Sherlock and a lot of amazing. Actually, give us another 30 seconds, please, Jack, for your context, because I think it's worth it.
Well, okay, so, well, my thesis proposal, which I defended in January of 2010, said that I could use topic maps to clean up structured conversation trees by finding the nodes at the same child level, in other words, siblings, which said the same thing. For example, if you say CO2 causes climate change and somebody else says climate change is caused by carbon dioxide, English speaking people recognize they said the same thing, but that's because they know an awful lot about how the structure of the sentence works and the fact that CO2 and carbon dioxide are synonyms. So, and that's the nature of topic mapping, is to find those identities and merge the structures. So I started writing a program that simulated a topic map and how it would work. And I fed it 690 IBIS conversation nodes that I'd pulled mostly off of Debate Graph and other places on the web. And I typed them in and I did not see this coming, but it found two of the nodes that it said these two are saying the same thing. And they had to do with, believe it or not, flatulence, cow farts. And I thought, okay, this works. The idea, the concept works. So that concept ultimately became the project Open Sherlock, which is fundamentally a gigantic NLP platform that drives a for building and maintaining topic maps by reading literature. That's my big game.
Thank you very much, Jack. And Peter Cho.
Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Oh.
Sorry. I'm one of 3 Peters in the room. I'm Peter Cho. I live in Oakland, California. My interest in text is primarily from a designer standpoint. I work as a product designer in industry, and I've also had special interest in type and type design and creative coding. I was at the Media Lab at MIT, where I did experiments in expressive typography and coding type. And then this topic in particular is especially interesting to me. I've worked primarily in companies that have publishing systems, and I worked at Medium for a couple of years. And one of the problems we worked on was how to make responses and discourse more civil and probably higher quality, and what are design interventions to try to do that. So that was when this topic came up, it just kind of piqued my interest. So I wanted to jump in for this one.
Very happy you are here. Hi, Brandel. We're just going through introductions and you will be lost, but very happy you are here. Candide Kemmler, I'm sure I pronounced that wrong. Please forgive me.
No, that's fine. So I'm from Belgium. I'm a freelance full stack developer doing mostly lately front-end work. And I have a keen interest for PKMs. I developed last year a plugin for Obsidian that lets you share some of your files and basically create a social network on top of Obsidian, which is a PKM software that lets you create a kind of a wiki on your local drive. And so I released it in February. I have something like 600 users or something, but I literally thought that I would rather do this thing decentralized and follow the course on solid and open data, linked data. And now I'm here. I just want to redo this plugin in those technologies or technologies like that. I mean, I want to make it decentralized, basically. So that's that. And I'm obviously very interested in text because Obsidian is all about text. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very, very much. So glad you are here. And we have Matthias.
Hi, folks. Matthias. I'm German, located in Hamburg. I guess I'm an interaction designer and time traveler. I've done research on the history of hypertext and graphical user interfaces. I've worked on Adobe GoLive Cyber Studio and web editor of the 1990s. I've worked for Sun Microsystems on StarOffice, LibreOffice, OpenOffice.org. And right now I'm time traveling on digitized material with my own IIIF viewer. So I'm zooming space and time, and I will share lots of links in the chat. Happy New Year.
I just want to credit you for 2 things. As I say here in the comments, I think GoLive was the best web editor ever. And also, you were the first ever to cite any of my work in any kind of academic publication, so thank you. And
I'm done for today.
And over to David LeBeau.
Yeah, hi. So I'm in Tallahassee, Florida. My background is in learning sciences. For the last many years, I have been working on developing a what we call a multi-source, machine-assisted multi-source sense-making system for combining pieces of information from multiple sources into something new and of value. And just very briefly, I took volume 1 of The Future of Text, imported 170 essays into Highlighter, which is the product name, and produced a narrative structure by arranging excerpts from the 170 essays into a kind of storyline with 9 chapter headings. And so now that there are 3 volumes, we're at least going to consider the possibility of doing a bigger activity with the same technology to see what might emerge from this type of analysis of the content.
Yeah,
And
thanks.
also I should mention Kemp Williams from Rosoka is associated with Highlighter. We're working on integrating entity extraction and NLP into our system.
It's all just fantastic, David. So for the group, two things to mention. Number one, David will do a presentation on this next Friday, same place, same Zoom, same time, same everything. Our group will now generally meet only on Mondays, but the odd Fridays, if it's best for presentations, will remain for that. Also, because I think that David's task is almost impossible in terms of extracting issues, questions, and so on from the articles. I think that in addition, what we're going to do is email everybody in the community and ask them about what they think the issues around the future of text are and a few other questions. So that whether you've contributed an article or not, you will have the opportunity to do a really brief bit, not just a huge, humongous thing. And if we, in another session, we walk through how to actually pose those questions, because if they are just free form text, it's harder for us to get a shape of how they connect. So maybe as a community, we can figure out the right questions to ask, so we can build a bit of a shape of how different people in our community look at this. This is something that the kind of approach that some people of our mindset will immediately agree to, and then a lot of other people will immediately just never do. So how do we bridge that gap? Peter Wasilko, final Peter.
Hello, I'm an attorney and a programmer. My main interests are university futures in general. And within the future of text context, I'm very interested in literate programming and interactive fiction systems, particularly based on Inform 7. So I'm looking at ways to leverage the technology to try to make programming more accessible to people from other disciplines. Primarily, of course, they're members of the legal profession, where I think there's an awful lot to gain by providing legal counsel with a background in computer and information science that could help them to do better lawyering. And the two disciplines I find are highly complementary. My programming work makes me a better attorney, and the way I think about things as an attorney makes me a better programmer.
Thanks, Peter. And Brandal, also from California.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brandal. I am very interested in text and in particular the way that new interaction capabilities can be brought to bear against them, in particular virtual and augmented reality. I am a strong adherent of embodied and sorry, it's early here. The extended mind sort of thesis and embodied cognition, meaning that the more that we understand about the way our bodies move and the relationship that has to the way that we can kind of think and understand, the better we can create expression. And so in the context of the present conversation, I feel like enriching text in a discursive format with tone and motion, and having the ability for people to be able to represent themselves sort of more holistically should be considered as a component of text. And to that end, I've built systems in virtual reality for being able to record, play back, and share kind of gestural information at the same time as encoding sort of textual information. I look forward to being able to kind of contribute that in the future.
Thank you, Brandel. And finally, Lorenzo.
Hi, everybody. Happy New Year. Late to the party. Sorry for my webcam, I fixed that later. Where I'm a linguist. I'm also an HR consultant. I'm highly interested into, augmenting text misses messages like emails to help people understand the let's call them the cross-cultural aspects. For example, I can ask, I don't know, any AI at this point to write an email for me, and the mail will be in perfect English. But how does that email will impact a person from, I don't know, Lebanon or Australia or, I don't know, Italy? So how can I augment and make that text transparent from also cross-cultural point of view?
We have so many perspectives here today. Wonderful. Glad you're here. I just went through my emails, Lorenzo, and we have a thread going way back. So I'm glad you're here today. So the plan for today is on, let me just open it myself, the Google Doc. I think I can paste it there again. Yeah, so that's the link. Is for the beginning to talk about why we want such a thing as a more thoughtful discussion system, or maybe if that's not the right phrase, the way that I framed it initially, and this is to give you guys something to agree with or to fight against, is quite simply, instead of sending emails and posting social media messages that just disappear in a stream, send each other documents. It doesn't have to be an actual document, doesn't have to be a PDF before Fabienne starts screaming at me. But the idea is that we dream back to the days of letter writing. So you spend time, you formulate a reply, do your research, and you post it in a way that your community or that other person can read. Doesn't have to be flat. Document could be multidimensional, but the whole point is that it takes a little bit of effort, but in return, the reader gets something clear. And for the future, it is accessible. Most of our communication today will be gone in a couple of years. You know, we've all searched for that email that's so important that's gone, right? So that's the initial perspective. Please tell me if you feel this is way off or if there's a specific attribute or angle you want to highlight of why any kind of slower, more thoughtful discussion is useful. Even if it's completely obvious, like we don't want to just be on Twitter supporting Trump all day, inadvertently. Okay, well, while you guys are thinking, you're all being a little bit too polite. I just want to highlight what Fabienne and Brandel particularly has brought to this community over the last year with the VR thing, which I know Raphael is a bit skeptical of still. And the whole point for me, why VR, AR is so important, is because it is a richer environment. So once the technology is sorted out, you put on a headset, or maybe it's projected into your eye, whatever it might be in 10 years, we will think of a document or a computer screen as being a very flat, compressed version of that information environment. So what might be useful for us now to dream about an absolute full Star Wars holodeck, interactive, incredible experience, but it can't just be a live thing that disappears. An example, of course, is, yeah, Brandel, take over, but I just wanted to say this meeting today will be transcribed. The transcription will be awful because speech and writing is different. And that is okay. We need this for the future. But it really also helps highlight the fact that if you do write a little bit yourself, it's just so much better than this kind of mumbling. Okay, Brandel, and then Raphael, and oh, suddenly many. Brandel.
Thank you for the nudge into the sort of further exploring the rationale of a more immersive computing system. I think, yeah, while I would say that Gmail has actually allowed me to preserve most of the emails that I have, those are my personal ones and not my professional ones, where I tend to be, it has perfect storage, but it's much more easy to get absolutely buried within them. I've received tens of thousands of emails a year, and most of them meaning very little, but the sort of volume of it meaning that I have so few cues, so few handles to be able to pull on to kind of figure out what any particular conversation was, what kind of sense to follow. And I see that as the fundamental promise of having a more immersive system, is having the ability to reify and render effectively more aspects of what it is that a message, a piece of information is. And maybe even at the point of consumption as well as at the point of retrieval, the point of initial consumption having characteristics that can be kind of encoded along with it. So knowing what kinds of spaces I was in while I received an email would be as relevant as the content of the email itself. And being able to kind of convey dimensions and attributes of that. Now that we have, disk space storage that's fundamentally vastly too cheap to matter, there's a lot of stuff that we should be able to kind of encode. And with a more, in particular, with a more immersive computing environment, having the ability to kind of replay those things back, I think is very, very important for us. I made a kind of a joke mobile preview website so that you could kind of preview what something would look like on a device. A lot of browsers have that these days. You could put something up on a mobile phone screen. But what mine did was have the phone with the website, but also locate that phone on a busy street corner, so that you could actually remember that not only is the screen smaller, but somebody's attention is partial, and if you are too interesting, then they, at best may miss their bus, and at worst may hit it on the street. So I feel like there are myriad ways that all forms of text, including conversations, can be improved by that. I think that in a multi-party communication, either synchronous or asynchronous, the opportunities abound for being able to allow people to voluntarily, of course, encode and convey multiple sort of dimensions of performance that would be incredibly beneficial for people.
Thank you, Brandel. Before I hand the torch over, could you please, we're writing here in the chat, and the chat is fine, but if you wouldn't mind writing some bullet points in the Google Doc, that would be really cool and very useful. That goes for all of you. If there's something specifically you want to say, just also put it in there. And Raphael.
Hello. So yesterday we were here in the community kitchen. This is a Japanese community that has been around for 86 years. And what's different about this place is that there's a theater, and pretty much everybody is born an artist. So lots of writing, lots of painting, lots of theater, dances, plays, songs, all of those things. And Japanese culture tends to be very, very archival focused. So in the place that I'm at right now is where they keep all of the archives from all of these 86 years. So there are books, there are journals, there are movies, there are video, there are like all the multimedia that you can think of has been registered and recorded so that people can watch in the future. And yesterday we were in the kitchen and we were, playing some 35mm slides on a slide projector and looking at pictures from, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And then connecting with the point of having conversations, I would love to have not only conversations with people in the present, but, keep thinking about having conversations with people from the past. And, how would I talk? The future would be kind of like an AI kind of area. But if somehow it was extremely easy to, upload and structure and interpret and tag all of the content that is here, it would kind of feel like I would be able to talk with with ghosts or, people from the past. And I don't think people would read like hundreds of journals, but if there was a way to have that information there and maybe ask a question, get a reply, or have a little conversation, based on the contents that are here, it would be a proxy to something, very interesting. So my interest from has always been in learning and going from the process of curiosity into understanding, and a lot of skills that people have here are only passed down verbally. So that's also something that I would love to register for the future. How can these conversations be timeless so that it doesn't matter 100 years from now, maybe a grandson, granddaughter of somebody would love to have a conversation with somebody that is alive today. How would that happen? How would that interaction happen? And I feel like all of these things have to do with text and having conversations with people that are willing to listen and share their knowledge.
Raphael, thank you, but I should have pressed Brandel a little bit, and I will afterwards, but I'm going to press you and everyone else a little bit. Of the kind of things that you're talking about, that we're talking about, what would that do for us, and why would we want this? Because we're supposed to, I'm not very good with scheduling, but we're supposed to in the beginning talk about more the effects and then maybe later talk about more specifics. And that was a question for you, Raphael.
Understood. I'll give it some thought. I don't think I have a reply at the moment, but I'll keep that in mind, and how that can be applied or thought of on how we can bring that forward.
Okay, that's cool. Thank you.
I think that was a very good point, though, about the need to pass on the information. There's a lot of people who grew up in the days when email and Usenet was pretty much the only way of communicating anything. And there was a lot of skills that went along with that. And now we've got dozens of other ways of doing it. And the skills of doing that in email, which is still a valid choice, are beginning to fade. People are less disciplined. The software has degraded significantly. Most people don't understand how to maintain a thread. Most people don't understand about interleaved replies. It makes life, it slows things down. It's a more inefficient way when it could be efficient, and it's not. And I think that's something which needs to be tackled, but it needs education. People need to realize that there is a way of doing this which will free you from the burden of every message contains 0.5 terabyte of everybody else's previous messages, simply because that's the way that Microsoft does it.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Peter. Over to Fabian.
Thank you. The funny part for me was that when you started to announce the topic of conversation, I was like, interesting, but sounded to me a bit remote, let's say. But I thought, well, I'll trust the group. I'll trust you and people to make that interesting. But I did not really see how I would be able to contribute. But then funnily enough, the last thing I did before going on a holiday was giving a workshop to kids. So I have literally a box of headsets so that they would actually play with it, so that it's not like a description of what VR is, but they would have literally virtually first-hand experience of what VR is, and a bit for context, because they are indeed new faces. What I like to focus on in VR is text and code. So you'll have a line of text, and then you can move it around, and you can type code with a virtual or physical keyboard. And why do I mention this is because the very last thing I did before holiday was like, you move your piece of text or code, and then if you have friends, like a list of friends, they would see, let's say, your last message or your last bit of code, so that you have your code snippet, you put it somewhere in space, and they see it, and thus they can annotate it with, again, something spatial. They would have an annotation under. So I'll share the screen just for a second, if I remember how. The new year. There, let me know, please, if you can see it. Can you see anything?
Yep.
Okay. So just for a bit of context on the in front, the big line here is the virtual keyboard, the GXR or the code snippets. And what's less visible is at the bottom is a piece of text I move, and the other one is the piece of text that was received with its position. That's the, let's say, interesting part. It's the rotation was what's changed basically. And that's done also for Candid and others in a decentralized fashion, federated through Immerse, which is the same protocol ActivityPub based as Mastodon. So that can be text like this or code like that. Also a literal perspective. So here that's a screenshot taken from the position where the friend, which was myself, sadly, but it's for testing, was sharing. So you can share text code, but also like a in-space perspective of what you are seeing. So yeah, I described that a little bit as a code issue, difference between the message pass live as we're doing now versus message that will persist and with a position in space. But yeah, I think that's one novel, not necessarily useful or efficient, but a novel way I would argue to have the trace of conversation in space.
I would, Fabian, don't talk yourself down. I know you're not really, but when you say maybe not useful, it's extremely useful, because having been in that environment, you know, it allows us to feel that floating around. And, you know, the Future of Text Volume 3, on the very first page, it says, this whole thing is an experiment and an experience. If we don't experience, we can't really understand what it is, right? So, and I'm so grateful for that. And to translate a little bit of what Fabian has done, it is text floating wherever you want it in a virtual environment. You can have whatever background you want, but this is computable text. So when he talks saying it's programming, yes, it can be, but the fact that you can choose a block of text and have something happen based on that is phenomenal. And it really aligns so very well with what Brandil was talking about, where you are and placement and so on. And it's very easy for us to say that in a completely rich environment, projectors of VR or whatever, text can be all over the place. Until we get to play with something like Fabian has done, it's so vague. So Fabian, I'm forever grateful. And I will ask you, and David, we're coming to you in a second. Fabian, I will ask you the notion of a more thoughtful conversation. If we magically manage to make it happen as a smaller, bigger community, what will that actually do for us? How will it change who we are?
That's also why I came back to our conversations on Monday and Fridays and Mondays now, is because I don't know yet. It's the same thing as prototyping. That's what's interesting to me, is if I already know the outcome of this conversation of what I would learn, then yes, I wouldn't be here. So hopefully better persons, at the risk of sounding a bit cheesy, but that's my hope, at least, that being able to dig deeper in a topic. There was the Peter mentioned before, being able to manage like the threaded conversations, the depth of the conversation. So that's my hope, to be able to have deeper, better, higher quality conversation in topics, in breadth, in length, also over time, as Raphael mentioned. So yeah, that's the hope for me.
I'm glad that that is a hope, and just it is. I'm so glad at the honesty here. There's no platitudes coming out on this question, because it is actually very difficult. Because in this community, a lot of the conversation we have is Twitter-like, but then also we make books. But so few of the people here feel comfortable writing a long, quote-unquote, academic article. And of course, it's a very specific thing. You know, I'm going through my PhD. I find it difficult too, really difficult. So we're probably trying to bridge the gap between those types of communications, right? We have to lower the barrier of writing without making it superficial what we're writing. That's not so easy. David.
Yeah, so first, just a little askew from the main theme. In the past week, there have been a number of posts about, for example, ChatGPT has been banned by the New York City public school system. And other venues have said no machine generated text. So I think that's something to keep, as far as the future of text, it sort of reminds me of what happened in Cambridge, Massachusetts back in the 70s or 80s when they started sequencing DNA, and the city went crazy about, this is against the laws of humanity or whatever. But I think that's a topic that's going to become more and more salient, which is how does this capacity of machine agents to assist in writing or even to generate writing, how does that get worked into the human in the loop kind of thinking? The other thing I wanted to just put on the table, I think there's, as far as the future of text, we have this kind of paradox where today we have the storehouse of human knowledge at our fingertips, and some of you guys have backgrounds with hundreds of books on shelves. And at the same time, the digital age has had an impact on literacy, and people tend to not want to read long forms like books or long articles. And so how are we going to adapt technology and methods to the new reality of how people read, which is changed? And so I think that, and then the other kind of paradoxical thing is, and this is where I'm really interested, Frode, in your interest in VR and the headset environment. Everybody's carrying around a little tiny screen in their pocket, and so much activity is happening on that screen in an era of information overload. And the beauty of having a virtual reality is that you can now represent so much more information and have that available for making the connections that lead to new ideas and innovations, in almost like a full wall display. And just the last thing I'll say, I'm working with a fellow at Virginia Tech, Chris North, who has spent years studying large displays, which has been of great interest to the intelligence community and major corporations, like with their war rooms and so forth. So there's a lot to draw on as far as other sources of information to think about where things are going with the future of text.
Yeah, thank you. I see Mark is coming up. I just wanted to ask the question to the group. Is long form really better? I don't think so. I had to write a massive PhD thesis, and much of it is fluff. We all read newspaper articles, news stories, where the first paragraph or two is, a guy walking down the street with his dog, his name is Harry, and all this context, and then you realized World War III has started. I mean, the brevity and depth, of course, is an interesting thing that we're going that we're going around in circles on. And the other thing, sorry, I lost my little notes here, was you're talking about the big screen. And one thing I've been doing with my AR headset is picture video really large. It's my other passion. And when I look at a video that is massive, like we do in the cinema, it is not the same thing as we look at the same content on a small screen, right? And I know some directors are very snobby about this, saying if you haven't seen the movie in the big screen, you haven't seen the movie. That's one aspect of saying it. But you do actually see things in a different ways. So the question that is interesting is, of course, when text has all this space and flexibility, what actually happens to the way that we connect with it? It's going to be interesting to find out. But David, I'm going to ask you the same question. If we manage to develop systems for more thoughtful conversations, what will that do for us?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest challenge, I'll just take a crack at that. The biggest challenge facing humanity is how can people from different disciplines and who see the world through different lenses communicate and collaborate in a way to address some of the huge problems that we're facing in sustainability and social justice and so forth. And to the extent that we can develop technology that allows people to share their ideas and come to different share points of view and come to find solutions to complex problems, the future of the planet and all of life is at stake. So I think there's almost nothing more important than focusing on developing systems to facilitate transdisciplinary ways of working together.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Mr. Anderson.
I'm going to sort of roll back something to actually, fun enough, links with what David opened up by talking about, which is sort of text and sort of addressability and things. One of the things I've just sort of agreed to undertake with someone is to write a book, and it's on a tool in the PKM space. But one of the first questions I asked my co-author is, said, are we writing a hypertext or are we writing a digital book? And we've already decided it's going to be the latter. And if you can linearize it some way, someone has to have it in a sort of, in an enormous PDF, that's fine. But that shouldn't be a design constraint early on. And I think that's interesting because it links to one of the things I took away from conversations last year about VR and how we might get stuff into VR. So basically, if you have text and you have some semantic markup, yes, it's lovely to have it all in beautiful typeface and things. But I think we need to be really careful about what we hold on atavistically to in terms of what we grew up with paper. Because we want some of the affordances we talk about now, things need to be more flexible and we need to produce in a way that you can consume them. So a very hypertextual work with lots of links is never going to be good in paper. I mean, that's the way I felt about my thesis at the end. Trying to ram it into basically some random narrative didn't help because it wasn't a single narrative and shouldn't and wasn't. And we now have the technical affordances to yield on some of the ideas that have been sort of sitting in the long grass for a while in terms of a more hypertextual approach. And I also echo the point about not falling into the sort of hubris of technology that, the answer is the next one will be better, and to keep taking the human out of the loop. We're still at a stage where our best tools don't understand our written or spoken language. They can guess at patterns, but they don't understand the meaning of the patterns, which is a significant difference, whereas a human can very often just do those in a blink of an eye. So we need to make sure that's there. And on the matter of thoughtful speech, I think that one problem we have is, a hubristic assumption that the problem with any discord is that the other person just hasn't understood our point properly. The reality is the other person may never accept our point. And we just need to accept that as a possible outcome. And that doesn't have to lead to strife or something, but so much trouble is caused by overinvestment on trying to persuade someone of something that they're just not interested in or don't believe. And us just telling the same thing that we believe in a different way will do very little to convince them. And thus it's unsurprising a lot of things you see at the moment just fail because they're basically built for the technology or the philosophy rather than for actual human beings.
You started something really interesting in your last bit there, Mark, and I'd like to hear some more, please, because this is really key to the topic. Yeah.
In what way? In what aspect of it?
Well, I'm trying myself to find out more about where in our brains our personalities are stored, because you're right. You're not going to be able to argue the color of Meghan's new dress when she's with Harry with someone who just doesn't care about the royals, to make a fun example rather than a serious example. So that's absolutely an important aspect of this. But when it comes to thoughtful conversation where both parties have bought into the conversation, they feel it's important. Considering the experience you have with hypertext systems and academia, Wonder if you have something further to say now, or if you want to maybe say it later. Up to you.
Well, I'll just point that there's something else I wrote into the log earlier, and that's and there was a comment earlier about remembering essentially tacit knowledge we have, and they in a sense the simple answer is start writing stuff down. I think just keeping an ever bigger pile of digital detritus is just not tractable. And that was my experience in a brief sojourn in a ministerial data system in this country a couple of years back. It's just moving too fast for that. So you actually need to be extracting knowledge as you go. And that needs to be done by people who probably aren't necessarily, there's a small cadre of people. I think it's a fairly niche skill for people for whom it's natural to extract things without basically just wanting to write things from their very personal view. And one of the most useful things is early and regular writing down of stuff is massively useful, because for those who don't already know, it teaches you just how little you understand about what you're writing about. And that's something that's definitely come to me. I mean, the longest resource I've written now is 18 years, I think, is one I've been running, and I edit it pretty much daily. And what's really interesting is just how it improves over time, because even when you think you've displayed something, someone will come along, and this riff to the point that I think it was raised by Lorenzo, talking about different languages. Someone will come along and say, this doesn't make sense. And when you peel away that opening point, what it boils down to is that what's been offered uses vernacular they don't understand, or there isn't a decrypt or a mapping of the terminology, because it was so obvious to the writer, me, that I didn't need to encapsulate that. And that gets to the heart, to me, of how you sort of extract knowledge. Just sticking it in a bin of emails that you then put into a self-training AI, I think is a way to madness.
Thanks, Mark. Fabian.
Yeah, a couple of points. The first one was on long form, and David's point on people maybe overall potentially pushed by companies that profit from it. Let's say the TikTok 30 seconds video format, or whatever the next format will be, then are less and less able to do long form or read or create long form. I really warmly recommend Sherry Turkle's Reclaiming Conversation. It's a book, not a TikTok video, but maybe she did one 5-10 years ago, I forgot. And basically the premise is, if you put your mobile phone on the table during lunch, then you're not going to have a deep conversation, because you're going to think about your email, you're going to think about everything that's on the back of your mind. And as soon as you won't like the topic, you'll dive into some kind of distraction rather than taking the time to dive deeper in something you might not even be comfortable with. So I really recommend it. But why do I mention this now is because she's saying the most important, my interpretation of what she is saying is that the most important point is, if you have different medium, technology, ways to express yourself, you don't necessarily have to prefer one, but what you must preserve is the ability to juggle with them. So if you like long form, then great, you don't have to like long form all the time. If you only like though one type of content, medium, how it's presented, then you're probably going to get into trouble, because not everybody likes to have a conversation with one medium only. So I think that was a pretty interesting point from the book, that you must have some kind of literacy across medium and be able to use the right one whenever you want or need. But if you get stuck in only one, whatever the mechanisms behind this would be, commercial or not, you're putting yourself at risk. So I thought that was, yeah, pretty interesting. I'm going to put the link on the book also in the chat.
Thank you. On this really important aspect of it, with not choosing long or short form, there's also the thing that relates to what Mark was saying you're talking about, and that is, the longer you write, the harder it is for the human brain to do it right. It just becomes really difficult, because you have to maintain a structure, unless you want to, to write long is easy if it's just a brain dump. But if it's going to be a connected, coherent form, it's really difficult. I'm reading a book called Connectome. I'll hold it up in a second when I get it. And it's all about the brain, blah, blah, blah. But there's something really relevant to this, and that is, it seems like, here comes my beautiful assistant. I don't know if you're familiar with this book, highly recommended. It makes the point that it looks like connections in the brain are made randomly, right? So you have two neurites, dendrites, axons, whatever, kind of touching. The reason they connect is random, right? That is such an explosive thing, at least for me to learn, where the point is, as you learn something, connections will be strengthened or they will wither away. To me, it just explains how hard it is to think about connecting things, because you don't have these super brain cells just connecting automatically, right? It's really super hard. So should we make people want to write more long form, or should we help them connect short form? Matthias, sorry about that diversion.
No, totally fine. I just want to highlight first one point that has not been explicitly mentioned yet. It's the pace of the dialogue, of the conversation, of the discussion. If you have a chat, it's rather fast. You have the short messages in texting and TikTok and so on. No, sorry, not TikTok, in the chats of Twitter and so on. Mastodon, I should change right now. On the other hand, if you slow things down, you have more time to think about what the other just said. And therefore, I hope that the quality increases. You don't have to write thick books and push it out until others can join in and comment on what you've done. And therefore, I have two examples at hand. I have no such wonderful assistant as you, but I've prepared some things. So one is the Clue Train Manifesto. And I don't want to point to the content of the book, but on the structure. It's 4 authors that have written this book simultaneously, and they read their drafts and they commented their drafts, and you can read lots of footnotes from one chapter to the other. So it's four sections and 4 authors. You can read lots of footnotes from the other authors in this book on the chapters that have been contributed by one of the other authors. Quite wonderful to see the structure of the book, because you can see the vivid process of discussing, well, do you really think this is true? And I have a different aspects. And so the quality of this one enhanced over time. Second example, Derek de Kerckhove, The Architecture of Intelligence. Derek de Kerckhove is the former leader of the McLuhan Institute in Toronto, and he wrote this not so thick book as a kind of open source. So while writing, everything was online already, and he used and incorporated all the comments from the community into his reasoning. These are 2 examples what can happen if you slow things down and have an open conversation with friendly people who criticize your work while you're still writing the work.
I'm so glad you highlighted that, because sorry, can you mute? I'm hearing myself, which is awful. That's not what anyone wants to hear. This is what I wanted to have with the future of textbooks. I wanted people to read the drafts and then feel free to comment on other articles in the book. So thank you for highlighting the Clue Train Manifesto. And I do think it is a fantastic model for going forward. In this community, we've often talked about the notion of a binding, so that, for instance, with our own Future of Text, someone should be able to have a binding that includes all 3 books in one PDF or similar. Someone should also be able to just highlight a few articles, bind that into a new binding, almost like cutting and pasting paper. So you should therefore be able to refer to different parts of the same document as if it's an external link or citation. So that, for instance, what we're doing here, we can write something to each other, and at the end of the year, we bind it into a thing like the Clue Train. So that was fantastic. Thank you. Before I let you go, if something like this continues happening and we really make a system for this thoughtful conversation, what will happen to us and how will it change us? What will it bring to us? You have to answer that, Matthias, at least to an extent, or say you're going to answer later. How will it? What is the point of this? Because I'm a little concerned about almost running down the techno hole. Not that you did that, but in terms of our larger conversation, really looking at what is the point of this so that it's not necessarily obvious.
Well, down the rabbit hole. If people like myself, interaction designers, design systems to support what we have in mind, not clear in front of us, but we envision as a supporting system for folks who want to discuss new stuff, then time, so the interaction, this changing of stuff over time matters. Systems don't have to be fast. They have to support a slow process. It needs to be clear where the focus of the different discussions currently is. And therefore, new techniques or new interface elements are needed to point out, well, this is work in process, this is draft, this is almost done. I'd like to invite you to comment something on this. So these are the aspects that should be on the feature list for systems that support these kind of slow conversations based on text. I'm not sure whether I've answered your question because I actually forgot what you've asked, but it's not a silver bullet to support these kind of slow conversations that have a higher quality to support the folks.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think that's good. And I mean, just look at so many hands are up now. Obviously, we're having a fast simultaneous conversation now, which is difficult. It's really wonderful to hear from you how we can make something asynchronous. Stephanie, please go ahead. It's so good to see you. Do you want to spend a few seconds introducing yourself?
I live in New York. What can I say?
That says it all.
So several things. Is short better than long? It's not long, it's deep in terms of a conversation. A deep conversation could be short or long. And I think the emphasis on pace it leads to deep. You have to be able to return to it. It doesn't have to be long, but what is the mechanism of returning to something beyond comment? Comment is really for writing. It's not what I consider a conversation, a direct present time conversation. And the point that David made that, I think David made that if we want people from all different kinds of backgrounds to be able to meet and discuss planet-wide problems, if you don't return many, many times, you're not going to appreciate the point of view they're speaking from. And as someone said, we have to accept that someone won't accept our point of view and have that not lead to strife. But that is what we don't have. Some kind of rules or mechanism for enforcing a civility of kinds, or an expectation that to get to know someone, you're going to have to revisit what they've said at least 5 times and ask for clarification, or also get some background on a particular culture or whatever it is, the position they're speaking from, which won't always be scholarly and all that. You won't always have a field in terms of which to identify them. And you won't have, particularly for planetary problems, the answers or the solutions are going to have to be interdisciplinary. You will want some mechanism to build up some kind of random connection between people because you don't know how that'll work out. But I don't see any reference to how do you get an environment where respect for the other person's speech is somehow taught, expected, built in, enforced. And without that, the conversation won't go anywhere unless it's just people that already know each other, like this group or something like that.
I'm so glad you brought the notion of civility. You know, I have a 5.5-year-old son, and this is something we're desperately trying to teach him. But then it's interesting how that maybe should also be balanced with the expression of pure rage, such as with the climate emergency we're having. It's not something that necessarily is the best thing of sitting down and having a chat over tea. I'm overemphasizing your point, of course. There may also need to be a real opportunity for the expression of absolute horror. So to have the scale and to know what is appropriate for different levels. In other words, having the full spectrum available, but of course, civility being what we gravitate towards.
I don't think anyone's ever been convinced by rage. I think that I don't think that I mean, you can have rage and you can have works made that express rage and you can refer to people to them. But I don't think in the terms of an actual conversation, rage is a useful thing to be bringing in.
So if I can just jump in with one observation, and this is from some of the early constructivists from the 80s, but we have many Homo sapiens, members of our species, who are epistemologically challenged. And that could be the most serious problem that we face. How people know what they know is so flawed. And this is part of how mind evolved and who we are as a species, that's where a lot of the problems come in. Because if you're getting your truth value from some authority that cannot be questioned, there is no conversation. There's only a lot of what we have now. There's tribal conflict. So that's part of the biggest problem we're facing.
Or the problem is that those people are written off. In other words, every single human on earth and every single animal on earth for that matter, has a stake. And everything that have had their tribal identity has preserved them so far. There's something that they know that other people could learn from. And if you can't just write off all of humanity or great part of it because they don't share your epistemic background. I think epistemic humility is the main thing to be called for here.
Very good.
Stephanie, I'm so glad you're here on that point and the other points. And I just want to emphasize what I mean by rage. I'm not talking about screaming and swearing at people, not at all. But I remember many years ago with the Indian Ocean tsunami. It was Christmas, we were having dinner. I saw this on the web. And because it's all the same level headings for whether, some royal is wearing the wrong colors or whether this is happening to so many people, it's the same level of emotion. So it goes a lot over to what Brandel is talking about being able to communicate context. And, in writing, things get graded to the same level. So to be able to really emphasize that this is so important to me, and not in disrespect of someone else, but to have the ability for the range, I think is very important.
But then you invite someone to say, this has affected me deeply. I was watching this movie. Will you come and watch it with me? Will you, in other words, the thing that influenced you, you invite someone to see, and you see if that influences them. And if it doesn't, then it's your job to figure out what might influence them, that they would feel the same way. This is not an easy thing to do, but it's, to me, the only thing that really has any chance of bringing a planetary conversation together to solve planetary problems like the climate problem.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. I think you've answered the question of what it would do for us. So David, a brief introduction, please. And also before David introduces himself, he will be presenting what he's working on in 2 weeks. That will, of course, be distributed by email.
Hi, everyone. My name is David Benjamin. I live in Tulum, Mexico, but I'm from California. I've been working on different ways to make the web more useful and enable sense making, as well as trying to figure out how we can stop things like scams and abuse and false information. So it's been a lot of my work over the last 4 or 5 years. I'm going to be talking in a couple of weeks about this book that I've written called The Meta Web, The Next Level of the Internet. And I'm just going to talk about a thoughtful conversation. And it actually certainly works really well with the work I've been doing on the meta web. And the thoughtful conversation was the first thing that I was thinking about 8 or 9 years ago when I really went down this path. And one of the key insights that I came to was we need a shared context to have a thoughtful conversation. And what I mean when I say that is, if I'm looking at something on the web or within this online space, whether it's virtual reality, the web, or even augmented reality, if I look the same direction as you and I'm working on the same problem as you, then I need to see the same thing. And if I'm not seeing the same thing, then it's going to be very hard for us ever really, consistently to come to some kind of agreement about even what the problem is. So that's where I'm starting. And when I was these ideas were first sparked for me when I was thinking about, okay, well, we need to have some kind of short form platform that would allow everybody who wanted to learn about an issue, participate in a conversation about an issue, bring their work into conversations about an issue, where a platform where they could all go. And it wouldn't matter what your level is, if you're a layperson or a scientist. So you could go in and see a high level description of what the problem is. You could see what the different inquiries are, what the different perspectives that are associated with those inquiries, what the different claims associated with the perspectives, what the different evidence that's associated with the claims, what the different data sources, if any, online that are associated with those particular pieces of evidence. And my thought was, yes, this is very simplistic way to do argument mapping, but I think it's really important for us to be able to agree on what a claim is and be able to compare claims and be able to say whether they're supporting each other, and then be able to track back from a claim to the evidence that actually supports the claim, and be able to understand if that evidence is actually contradicting with other evidence. And so that felt really important to me. It felt like something we needed for any of these planetary solutions. And I then came upon the Trivium, and the Trivium, in the way that I like to think about it, is a 3-layer pyramid. So the bottom layer is knowledge, the middle layer is understanding, the top layer is wisdom. This is from about 500 BC. But it really, what it tells us is that we can't come to consistently wise decisions unless we have consistent understandings. And we can't come to consistently correct understandings unless we have a really good knowledge base. And I reflected, wow, with the internet, we actually have probably the worst possible knowledge base that we could have for a computationally intensive society. I mean, I just can't really imagine it being any worse. And I'm not saying that there's not good information in the internet, but what I'm saying is that when you're mixing good information with bad information and duplicate information and erroneous information and disinformation, and it's all indistinguishable, that's actually a horrible knowledge base. And it doesn't lead to us being able to come to consistently good understandings or wise decisions. And obviously on an individual basis, we can navigate it because we're smart, right? But it's not giving us what we need on a collective basis to be able to have collective understandings and make collectively wise decisions. And it's never going to happen until we fix our knowledge base, is my contention. So I threw out the idea of doing the long form and just decided that, well, I want to, the short form conversation platform, decide I need to focus on the knowledge base. And what's the most important thing? Was connecting all the information so that we can create that shared context that's available anywhere where you are on the web. So any web page that you're on, you could see all the things that are connected to the claims on that web page, and maybe even have the conversations on top of that web page, because that's where the people are, that's where they're going. So we might as well have everything just be worlds of information that build on this contextual footprint that we call a web page. So that's what I think.
Thank you very much from that perspective. I think there is a broad agreement on the need of shared connected knowledge here. So that does fit really well. We had a bit of change here in the hands. I have a question that I pasted in because Peter was leaving, but it's not going to be discussed until it's my turn. So anybody have any comments on David, or do we move over to Candide? we move over to Candide then, please.
Just one quick
Sure.
thought is this whole issue of provenance and pedigree. This is a problem. There's lots of good information on the internet, but how to sort through and filter through the higher quality, more reliable sources of evidence and knowledge or information is a big challenge, and a lot of people are working on that. That would be an interesting area to see what is the state of the art for filtering in the way David was suggesting we need to do.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Candide.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to stress how interested I'm in this concept of exploring VR possibilities for text. What I'm actually particularly interested in is to understand what the relationships are between different pieces of text. Because I mean, text, I think it's mostly, I mean, at least for me, comfortable reading, you know, at a short distance. Yeah, so what I'm interested in is if you see a PKM's graph view, I don't know if you are familiar with a graph view inside of a PKM. So it's a rather maybe not very sophisticated way of representing a knowledge base. It can probably become a lot more sophisticated. I've seen plugins of people that allow you to express the relationships between two nodes, so relationships between concepts. And you probably know of the Zettelkasten method that lets you create stories or paths between nodes so that you can then create a book out of it. What I'm interested in is how can we leverage that to let people discover other people's thoughts or other people's ideas based on what they know. And if there's a way that we can use maybe a combination of symbolic artificial intelligence, I mean, classic artificial intelligence that would analyze those semantic relationships between concepts, and maybe also more GPT type artificial intelligence that allow you to recommend next ideas to explore based on what you have in your own knowledge base. And this thing seems to me like something that would be extremely interesting to leverage in a VR environment, because there you can lay out a landscape of ideas just in front of you. And maybe with the help of artificial intelligence, it can become extremely joyful as well to hop from one idea to the next.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yeah, do you have a perspective of, if we, as I've asked before, if we managed to do such a thing, what it would actually do for us? Why we would want this?
I think we probably already expressed it. I think we want us to be more sensitive to what's happening around us. We want people to be more knowledgeable as well, and more sensitive to what happens to other people, to the planet, to animals and everything. And that, I think, needs demands knowledge and discover other people's perspective.
Thank you. Carl?
So, yeah, one of the things, so I'm glad brought up Zettelkasten and stuff too, but there's almost the way of constructing kind of threads of conversations. Kind of joked it's somebody else's dissertation, but like a Kahnemanian system 2 user interface and stuff. So my thoughts are, you have a collection of texts, and then you can pull it up, like like remove the hyperlinks, get it into and go offline and, and engage with a comprehensible amount of content that you can, or small enough so you can identify some coherence there. I mean, it's just, I mean, if you write a paragraph and there's a hyperlink in the middle, does anybody actually even read the paragraph? I mean, that's one thing. So there's kind of that zigzag architecture from, I mean, it's like film is a sequence of frames and things, but then with the internet, any frame can be connected to any other frame, so you can just go. So can you pull up, can you identify a thread? And so that's kind of the technical side. And then I'm going to post a link. There's Peter Elbow, professor. He's professor emeritus at University of Amherst, and years ago, there's been several versions of it, but he frames our whole scientific method. Critical thinking doesn't have to mean tear things apart. It's supposed to be about thinking carefully. And so he's got a whole thing about that we need methodological believing in the validity of stuff we don't agree with. That's the major tension. So I'll go ahead and post a link here. So there's the article itself, which identifies 3 arguments. So being able to develop, like using all the various tools we have, like the IBIS and things, to really go through and figure this out. And then the link is actually a search. There's probably 12 or 15 articles that kind of start talking about applying, how we apply this thing. But that's actually a major project for me, is trying to organize conversations around this believing game. And I've been trying for I've brought it to people's attention for 10 years and stuff. So when you got something that's really challenging the hegemony, the prevailing paradigm that people presume their presumptions and stuff. So I'll leave it at that, but that's just wanted to bring this to your attention.
Thank you. That's a good set of articles to have a look at. So we're coming down to the last half an hour. So I have 2 questions, really. One of them is, Peter on the Google Doc mentioned email lists. And I think there's something there. We shouldn't just throw away old technology. So might a well-designed email, and as an email list, an accessible way to browse, as Stephanie says, to come back to the conversation, be part of the solution? I mean, we were supposed to be why earlier, and now we're supposed to be more on the how, just for today. And yeah, might that be a model for us? Because to get someone to use a new app or a new website, probably not going to happen easily. But might that work better than a Twitter Mastodon thing? That's a question. But then I also have a question about what is the appetite in this community to continue this conversation? Would you like to maybe try to do this in a monthly way? Because today has obviously been mostly a mess, as a first conversation would be, to try to really narrow down on what we mean by this, what we mean by deep conversation, what the benefit would be, and what competing ways of dealing with it might be. So I'm going to ask, I see that Stephanie and Fabienne are next, but can those of you who want to have it on maybe a monthly basis, no commitment, but can you do a hands up, either virtually or physically? Okay, I see some hands. Okay, that's quite good. So we'll try to organize something. And I'll give the mic to Stephanie and Fabienne, and then some of you haven't spoken at all, and Peter. So it'd be really nice to hear from you, even if in general. Stephanie.
There's been a discussion about having shared context or a perfected knowledge base. And I think I just want to speak against that. I think pursuing that goal will get in the way of of a real conversation between people that don't from the beginning understand each other. And I think what you said about the brain, Frode, I mean, your brain comes out with a unified idea eventually, but to realize that what you're allowing, the way it happens is a lot of random connections get made and then others get strengthened. And I think a good conversation happens that same way. And you don't try to structure ahead of time, say, okay, you're all here to discuss this, and this is the context, and here's all the things you're supposed to share and know in common, right? It's like, no, we're here today at this exact moment. You have some kind of interest, and I have some kind of interest, and you make connections like you do at a party or something, and people begin to talk, and then things that prove more interesting or more doable, they get strengthened as you go along. So I understand the value of curated knowledge bases and a carefully formed context, and I think they have a place. But from the point of view of actually having conversations amongst people who don't already agree with each other, I think you have to be tolerant, or at least imagine that sometimes that isn't going to be true, and you can still have a conversation.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, those two issues are, of course, very, very important. And when we're talking about having thoughtful conversations, it can be planetary scale, save the world, which is hugely important. It can also be trying to organize where to build a new building. It can be more practical, etc. So I think that a certain bit of structure we must have. We must at least have an initial topic. But absolutely, Stephanie, there is real value in being able to follow someone. I mean, with all due loving respect, Peter Wasilko sometimes in our community will say stuff that makes absolutely no sense to me. It'll take me maybe 6 months to a year for it to snap, because we have very different ways of looking at the world. So that is really important to maintain an opportunity for. Fabian.
So I'll start with the technical question. It's the email versus Mastodon, ActivityPub, etc., because it's easier. In my opinion, the technical people who like to implement stuff, should do it, but in a way that is responsive, meaning, yes, the state of the art and federated, let's say Mastodon, but inclusive in the sense that it will fall back to email, so that people who don't want to be in this new thing, that don't even trust it, they don't understand, they don't get why it might be interesting, because it might not be, at least have a way to be included in the conversation. So it's an easy way I see it. And again, that's the burden of people like me also who want to push for new technology. So yeah, I don't think others should have to pay for this, let's say, in terms of time and efforts. In terms of the question you asked a couple of times, like what should a conversation about conversation and text bring to us? I actually thought back about what you asked me also when I joined the group, so like a year and a half ago or something now already. And I think I focused a bit more on intelligence, like being able to learn more and share more. And I think since then, it changed a bit my perspective in terms of agency. Like what I want to maximize now is agency. Might be how I understand still myself and others and the world around me and how I can have an impact on it. But I think focusing on agency and providing agency also to people around me that I believe will use it for what I find personally positive is good. I think it's not like, let's say, power or something like this that would be abused, and it's not power over others. It's also power over myself, let's say. So I think agency to me would be a positive outcome in both the conversation themselves, the tools around it, the medium we would use and shape that.
Thank you. Peter. Peter muted.
Sorry about that.
Don't worry.
Okay, one of the things I've noticed a lot of people talking about lately is that this dream that they can set up an AI that will filter out all misinformation. And I see a lot of that. And of course, what ends up happening is people are just talking over one another instead of ever engaging on the level of specific warrants so that you can look at what is the basis of your reasoning. Instead, you'll have one group say, well, let's just filter out everything that disagrees about point A or point B. Beautiful case. I was watching a CLE program. We have continuing legal education courses that we have to take in order to maintain our license to practice law in New York State and most states throughout the states. And they started citing study results. And nowhere in the presentation did they ever provide a citation for the studies whose results they were citing. So you have no way to engage on whether the result that they're claiming is based upon a faulty study design, whether it's something that might actually be worth reconsidering your own based assumptions and rethinking your own thoughts, if you don't have any way to get down to, okay, what is the basis of this claim? Where is it located in the literature so that I can go and actually pull the paper? Are there any countervailing papers that you're aware of that you're not telling me about? And we need to be engaging at the level of substance instead of the level of labeling, because you'd find one group that would say all the ideas of another group are misinformation, and they'd just be talking over one another, and again, never engage in a level of substance. So one thing I think we could do, even with conventional email, is if we could just maybe like agree upon some little notational conventions so that when you reply to something, you could use a little phrase or code, basically the equivalent of typed links from Triggs taxonomy, so that you could indicate when you're writing back in a manner that a machine would be able to filter and pick up on. So you could write back questioning something, maybe C question mark could mean, what's the citation for this? And then an automatic system would be able to deal with it without any fancy AI or anything. Just some simple notational conventions that we could agree on, and then eventually build direct support into the tooling for. But if it's getting at the level of abstraction of what's misinformation versus what's an inconvenient question that challenges my belief system, it's just going to wind up evolving into politics and not making any substantive progress.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. That's very provocative and leading up to some further notes along that. So thank you very much. And yes, Peter Chu.
I have a lot of thoughts on the discussion. I guess just coming from the side of working on product design and the tech industry, like I feel like there's a lot of emphasis on what are interventions from the product design standpoint that will encourage certain behaviors. So, Reddit, you post the rules of discourse at the top of each subreddit to encourage people to follow them. And they show that it does help a little bit. Twitter tried something where you share out a link before you retweet it, like it says, oh, are you sure you want to share this? If it knows that you didn't click on it. So, do you want to read this before you actually share it with other people? And I feel like I really love the idea of creating a system that would encourage more thoughtful discussion amongst people who don't know each other and maybe disagree. I think that as the core problem is a really great one to focus on. I think that embedded in it is also this point, or this like opinion that one of the biggest problems is there's a lot of inflammatory language. There's a lot of just like reactive, like people on social media, just like that's the stuff that gets elevated. And if there's some way that the system can train people who maybe are inclined towards that to actually think more about their arguments, or think more about, or read and learn and think about how, if the sources that they're looking at are reputable or not, then that would actually help the society overall. But it's also kind of like a little bit of a, maybe people on the left saying, okay, people on the right are acting a certain way. If we could create a system that made it so that we could train them, we could bring them back into the fold and we can have more civil discourse. And that, I don't, that's actually my personal point of view, but I also recognize that it's a little bit problematic to think of it that way.
I think it's a great way. And in our closing minutes here, combining a few of the last comments, because that just slots in so perfectly well. So I've written here, can we build a way to write and share and cite linked documents? Should we? And how can we link tempo, which is what came up earlier? In other words, one thing we've been working on for well over a year in this community, on and off, is what we're doing right now. Most, we have transcripts of some of them, but they're entirely inaccessible. Maybe at some point they will be. We have over 100 of these recorded meetings, well over 100. For future historians, in case something happens, wonderful. But for accessibility now, awful, right? Even the transcripts, because they're just lots of dead text. So my request for you is, if you do want to continue these, maybe on a monthly basis, where we try to stay more and more focused, because it's hard to do. I see your comment there, Stephanie. That's a fair point. But could you all consider writing to me a response to today with your thoughts on the future? But I don't care only about your thoughts for this. Can you do it in a way that models the kind of environment you would like to see? Like a test. Like if you want to make it an email, make it an email. If you want to make it a PDF, make it a PDF. If you want to make it a whatever, make it a whatever. But, for instance, you, Peter, where are you on my screen? There you are. Maybe you use some of these rules. Maybe Stephanie distinctly does not. But I mean, imagine how great it can be for book 4 of the Future of Text, which is focused on education, right? But having a thoughtful conversation with another person must be one of the highest forms of education available, right? So it really fits that. So imagine if the first chapter is all your responses, and if you send it to me in a format that is entirely undesirable for a book, maybe Fabienne decides to write it literally in a VR space, I'll take a gosh darn screenshot of it and put it in the book. Because we need to really start experimenting with how we feel this should be done, right? Everyone's a developer to the point of doing pencil sketches, right? So David, I see your hand. Was that was that an agreement or a comment?
Well, let me just throw this out real quickly, because you're on a topic that we've been thinking about. So you have 100 transcripts of meetings. Very little value because it's all linear information. The idea is that you import those transcripts into Highlighter. You mark up the excerpts that are interesting. You tag them. And then you start organizing related snippets into containers. And then eventually you take an intelligent agent who basically spawns a replicant of the group conversation and can more or less automatically categorize snippets of value. And now you have a way to extract meaning from all of this conversation by organizing it in ways that make it easier to see the associations and the potential for creativity.
I think that is absolutely something worth pursuing. I also think we should be more explicit. For instance, Peter Flynn was talking about an email mailing list. I would like to, believe it or not, communicate via PDFs with Visual Meta, of course, right? So I think what might be useful, and imagine us sitting in a VR space where, up here is Peter's world of, it's got to be a mailing list, and I'm here. No, it's got to be a document, right? Where we can build conversations around specific topics that we explicitly say, this is what we feel is important. Because otherwise it becomes really amazing shapes to kind of study, but we're looking for momentum, right? We're looking to have something made. And if something made could just be statements about what to do, I'm not saying we have to start programming a whole new Twitter or anything like that. But how do you feel getting momentum into this? As in, I think we all agree that having better conversations and having better ways to see our thoughts is an existential problem, right? If humanity keeps being as silly as it is right now, we've got serious problems. I'm not saying we can solve it, but I'm saying that we, along with everyone else, have a responsibility to look at it in a serious way, right? So not just talk about it in general, do that as well, but also talk about how can we actually do it? Because one thing I will promise, and if I'm wrong, that's fine, But I promise that if such a thing were to happen, it's not going to be some absolutely amazing algorithm, high-tech supercomputer thing. It's going to be probably at least half just the way we choose to use the darn thing. What do you think? I see, Chris, your comment there, everything, it needs to be in the same space. Well, I mean, that's what's one of the exciting things about the web, everything can kind of link to everything else. So, that's absolutely important. And of course, if we pretend now that we are actually going to build something, we have to build the least possible thing we can, right? That has to be the lightest touch possible. Because, in Doug Engelbart's day, there was nothing. They had to build the entire thing. If somebody builds the entire thing now, we're going to have another Microsoft Word, and it's just, nobody can do that. Apple can't do that, Facebook can't do it, Microsoft can't do it. So what's the minimal things we can do to connect these things?
I think a fundamental problem is that there are anti-patterns built into all of our current technologies. The biggest one being mutable references, where you every time you dereference a URI, it's different every time, and so that gets in the way of building the context, building the collaborative processes. And so there's a lot of work in the decentralized space kind of in that direction, but ironically people keep creating new forms of mutable references, whether that's publishing to a blockchain or publishing Merkle tree publications to some address where you can still reference that address and get a different document every time. And so I see that coming up. So that this is, I think, unfortunately, it seems to be sort of maybe there are certain things we need to reinvent because the web is so permeated with these old ideas that keep coming back. But it's not easy.
Oh, that's just so important. And when we talk about decentralized, that's why I'm so document centric. I mean, my current dream is that all of you have all the articles that all of us write on all your systems, and that they link item to item, not to web servers. I think that's an absolute absurdity, that knowledge is linked to a computer that'll probably go down when someone stops paying the domain fees, right? So yes, but if you have a difference to me between a link and a citation is a link is a direction of where to go to find something, but a citation is a method for how you can identify if you found it, right? So if you have both of those combined, then if we communicate via some kind of a thing like that, it doesn't matter if 90% of it disappears or if all the servers goes down, one person can always send it back out. Mark, sorry, you've had your hand up for quite a while.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on, pick my words carefully because I'm not trying to make a zero-sum point, but I'm listening to David speak out about sort of taking things and doing extraction. One of the things that I find constantly missing in a lot of the literature is that the moment anything isn't easy or scales, any human verification or data cleaning just seems to go out the window with the tacit presumption that it's just too hard. So sort of taking say the future of text corpus, which is actually comparatively small, then it's actually quite interesting to look at a computed extraction versus a human one, done without knowledge of the other, to actually see things. Because one of the things that I reflect on as someone who has actually spent some time, like Fred, working on making vaguely clean the auto transcripts of some of the conversations, is that I sort of heard the comment, well, and note things of importance or relevance. And that's a very true statement. But I reflect on the fact that as I loop through these conversations several times, and probably with something else at the back of my mind, what actually springs to mind as relevant, funnily enough, tends to change. So the challenge then becomes, how do I automate that point of view? and this isn't to speak ill of what we're doing in researching and developing at the moment, but I think there's a genuine challenge there. I mean, it's hard enough to do at all at the moment. But bringing, so this, I guess, gets back to human in the loop. And the one thing we seem to persistently design out is the human, rather than designing a way for the human to be usefully in the loop and to do things that algorithms cannot yet or may never understand. And that's not me being, I'm absolutely stressed. I'm not a Luddite against any of this technology or any of these things at all, but it's just a reflection on us getting to places we didn't expect to because of overlooking things that we could have perhaps considered at outset.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Fabian.
I think when you mentioned through the challenge of all the content produced by the group, being videos, the transcript, the books, in my opinion, it's something to disentangle from. First, you need to make it accessible. Like, people need to be able to have access to it in whatever format, whatever ways. It can be like a truck with a physical paper printed on, or rocks, so it doesn't matter. And then you have preserving it over time. But I think you need first to make it accessible somehow. And then, yes, of course, preserving it so that if 5 minutes after it disappears, it's pretty pointless. Like, you can't invest time in making it better or building on it and having deeper and maybe better thought and structuring it. But I think really there are two different things with different challenges. We need to make it accessible, and that's me from the prototyping mindset, meaning like we need to do the first one first. Let's make it accessible somehow. And even if it's bad, and even if like in a week, in a month, in a year, it's like, whoa, we broke the links are actually broken, or the server doesn't work, etc. Yes, but I think not doing it at all by waiting for the ultimate protocol or design or any solution is risky, because basically it doesn't work, or it's just a perfect system that is just a fantasy basically. Whereas making it, breaking it, learning from it, there is going to bring us somewhere. And yes, it might be the wrong way, probably will be not the best way, but it's a way, and a way that where we go there and we iterate and we break and we I think not waiting for the perfect protocol or system or ways to collaborate is not that productive basically.
Yes, and so many things. This is actually quite super exciting now. Before my little note here on this topic, I just, there was some water on the floor earlier, and in the kitchen. Sounds irrelevant, it's not. In our computer field, we talk about interfaces all the time, right? But in physical sciences, this interface is between two different kinds of volume. And you all know that if you have water on the floor, of course you clean it up, but if you just spread it out more, it'll evaporate faster because there will be more surface area in touch with the air, right? It sounds stupid to mention it, but the reason I think it's so important is that it shows that if you have a greater interface, you get a higher transmission speed, right? It's just such a literal thing. So I saw Chris's comment here about content-based addressing. So I was asking in the text, I'm glad you're not reading the text and listening, which is brilliant. If you're aware of the visual meta thing that we work on. Have you heard of it? Chris, sorry.
Oh, yeah, I need to, I was going to reference to look back at it again.
Well, because the thing is, I mentioned earlier, Peter Wazelko saying weird stuff that takes me a while to understand, and that just happened. And what I'm thinking about is visual meta, for those of you who may not know, is really simple. It's an appendix that says what the document is in a format that a human and computer can read, right? But what if we extend it so that visual meta has a code glossary? Currently we have glossaries, but imagine if Peter says explicitly, when I write a document, if I do C:, link or whatever it is, what it means is this. He actually writes it somewhere. So when in the appendix of a document, it says, wherever Peter is the author, because this we already know, by heading we can know where is the author, these specific things have these specific meanings. And they're code-based. So he can choose to do exactly what he talked about earlier, whereas Stephanie in the same document don't have to worry about that at all. Right? So if we build up a very, very open, accessible way for people to express their intents in different ways, through a normal glossary to add context, through external glossaries, through code glossaries, and so on, might that help us get some of the extra control that we want to embed? I see David has his hand up and we have 5 minutes left. So just in closing from my end, I want to repeat my question, but in a slightly different way. And you don't have to answer now, but my request is please comment on how to build this infinite, wonderful system in whatever way works best for you. Okay, and we will use that as an example going forward. David, please.
Yeah, very briefly. One thing that I'm focused on in this idea of human in the loop is going back to the pyramid: knowledge, understanding, wisdom. There's actually, in my perspective, a lower layer, which is information. And from a learning science standpoint, having access to information doesn't make it actionable knowledge. So part of the issue is not only through conversation, but through interaction with other people and with content, all this information at our fingertips. How do we transform information into usable knowledge and into creative, innovative solutions to hard problems? So I am going to demonstrate next week really the sum of 20-year efforts since I went back to graduate school to get a degree in learning sciences, a system that engages individuals and teams in activities that prepare the mind for moments of insight through interaction with humans, machines, and the internet. And so that, just as anyone that is going to be available next Friday at the same time, that will be what I'll be demonstrating. We're in we've had a prototype version out for quite a while. We're now getting to a beta of a new version, which is very scalable and has really good performance specifications. And I'm looking forward to sharing that with the group. So thank you.
Yeah, we all look forward to that. And thank you for highlighting it to the group again. David, any closing comments from you? Actually, mic on would be more effective.
I guess that would work a little better. I wanted to add on to David's comment, just give my sense of how to turn information into knowledge. And I'm sure there are multiple ways to do it, but the way that I think is really interesting that I've brought into my work is making information into knowledge by connecting it to other pieces of information. So through relationships and through context, we make information into knowledge. And then to answer your question, I think we could create a system, and it's already partly built, that lives on top of the web and allows connection between all the different repositories of information, because different systems for communication have different reasons. I mean, there are pluses to email lists, and even some of my projects, we say, oh, this type of conversation can happen in email. This type of conversation can happen in Telegram. This type of conversation can happen on the forums. And there's a reason for that. It actually makes sense because it allows different types of interactions and different types of insights to come together. So we have a system that is able to connect all those things, connect an email to a Telegram message, connect a piece of content on a web page to a ledger entry.
Yeah.
And if we, so anyway, it's
Yeah.
kind of like a hypothesis, but with different types of connecting tags.
Yeah, indeed. And we're out of time. I'm so grateful for you guys being here today. And for some of us, we will meet Mondays. If you can make it, great. It's all very random. And then sometimes we'll have presentations on Fridays, including David in 2 weeks and David in 1 week. Any last question or comment before we click end and have the video uploaded to the YouTubes?
Have a great weekend. I think it was a very productive session today.
Have a good weekend, everyone. Take care.
Good
Bye.
to see you all.
Bye.